We're seeing plenty of headlines on various different things already for the new year here in Spain, which affect expats and all of us actually alike. Perhaps we can just confirm now that we know about the golden visa, 3rd of April, no more.
That's right. I mean, now we have a deadline, and this time it's going to be increased. And we are right now seeing and receiving a lot of questions and opening new files, obviously. Those ones who are entitled to apply or are during this month and next month acquiring property in order to have be ready, in order to have everything ready for the golden visa. Obviously, it's a challenge. Obviously, to apply, we need to do it before the 3rd, as you said. And obviously, as much as we have, as much as all the documents are ready, perfect. If not, we have to substantiate, and even though making the application, we have to substantiate, and in terms of, even though it's after the 3rd, once we have made application, we'll have time in order to submit, to amend anything that maybe is left that we couldn't add it on the application.
So if the application is in by then, even though you haven't bought the property yet, it's still okay?
It's not. I mean, you need to buy the property. The investment needs to be done before the 3rd. Yeah. I'm talking about maybe imagine that the apostille of a Hague Convention of a criminal records is not ready, or maybe the property is not duly inscribed in the property registry, because it takes time for that. I mean, it's not just the investment on pay on completion, then the rest of the money is also to inscribe the property into the property registry. That takes time.
Okay.
Sometimes it's 1 week, sometimes it's like 2 months.
All right. So if you were thinking of buying, still possible with the golden visa, as long as the paperwork gets sorted out.
Do it as soon as possible.
Yeah, because we still have 3 months time to do it, and that's pretty good average to gather and put together all paperwork. We're talking about property, but we could be talking about investments. Investment is much quicker, because we could get it ready in 8 working days, he said. I think the financial advisor said 8 working days, you will have your certificate of investment. Even though it will not be for 500,000 euros property, it will be €1 million investment.
The minimum is,
but you could withdraw it, and you will lose, obviously, the visa if you withdraw the money. But the good thing with this new law is that it respects the acquired rights. So that means whoever is in before the 3rd, and they've granted the golden visa, that means that they will carry on renewing under the same law. Okay,
so we weren't quite sure about that, but that is going to continue. If you have one, it carries on. It's not going to be taken away.
Everybody's safe. Everybody who managed to get it is safe. And whoever is still on time to do, and they do it before the 3rd of April, they're safe as well. So at least some good news, some clarity.
What about after that then? Given that we're not too long away from it, if somebody's starting to look now, they're probably not going to make it. There are still lots of other ways that people can buy property in Spain. We'll get to some other of the headlines that we've been hearing this week in a moment, of course, but generally there are other ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, buying a property in Spain is not a problem at all. I mean, the fact of you applying for golden visa, then you will not have the golden visa, but you will be able to have a non-lucrative visa if you really qualify for it. Or you could have a nomad visa, or you could just buy a being non-taxpayer, and you could be in Spain up to 3 months within 6 months. So buying a property is not a problem. You don't need to have a visa to buy a property. It's a holiday home. A different story is how much it's going to cost. We don't know yet.
At the end, I mean, obviously, with the golden visa, you were flexible in that you say, well, I will be resident or not. And with the non-lucrative visa, in case that you want to renew it, you need to be resident. And the rest of the visas or authorization to be resident. With the golden visa, it was a big flexibility on that. You may stay 1 day on 365 days.
That was kind of really what people wanted it for, to have that flexibility.
Many people that wanted to have that. So in terms of have a residency but not being tax resident, for example.
Okay, we've been talking in the studio just prior to coming on air about the headline in the last couple of days. It basically has taken over the UK press, because the headlines have been screaming these points. Now, at the beginning of the week, the PSOE government sat down, and Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister, come up with what they call a 12-point plan, measures to combat the housing crisis. In amongst those was, the most controversial, you have to say, is that he announced that he would limit non-resident foreigners from buying property by issuing them with a tax burden of up to 100% of the value of the property, making it essentially not financially viable for non-resident third country nationals to buy second homes or investment properties in Spain. Investment properties is probably the big thing there, because it's companies, probably perhaps not individuals, that have been buying up properties in Spain in order to rent them out, who aren't resident here, are never going to be resident here. One of the big issues there. There are questions today over the legality even of the actual phrase of what they're going to try and do. So where do you stand at the moment? I think there's some questions, more questions need to be asked from a legal point of view. There is a question as well.
Yeah, this is my thoughts. I mean, obviously reading what Pedro Sanchez have said. This is saying about 100% of the value of the property when acquiring by non-European Union citizens that are going to be non-residents in Spain. So it's non-residents and non-European Union citizens. And it says something about, in general, says, okay, will be increased 100%. When acquiring a property. Well, when you buy a property in Spain, there is one tax, which is value-add tax, which is 10%, or a stamp tax, when you buy a new property. If you buy a used property, a second-home property, it's used property, then you pay it's called Impuesto de Transmisiones Onerosas, Impuesto de Transmisión Patrimonial, which is transmission tax. Which is in Valencia community, for example, is also 10%. So what it's saying is, okay, it's going to be increased in some way, that tax, which value-add tax is government, so it could be increased, and transmission tax is regional. So the government cannot increase that. So because it's increased by the regional governments. In this case,
central government.
Exactly. So what if they do like they did with the wealth tax? Because some regions has eliminated, it was prevented to be done in Valencia community as well, and has not been done, I expect, because of the floods and the Dana. What if they do it? I think it's illegal. I mean, to do another tax to tax what is already taxed.
Yeah.
So it's something that you cannot tax something that is already taxed. This is lawful. But anyone expects or believes or I mean, in my case, trust in Pedro Sanchez that they are not going to do it. I mean, I think they said they will do something, and probably will be some issue that will be in the court in the future.
Do you think we might have to wait for a court case and for a judge to rule?
I think I wouldn't say a bluff, but they're just playing with probably.
Well, we have to think about politics here, don't we? And let's face it, the budget for Spain has to go through at some point soon. It's up in the air as to whether it will go through. And, of course, if it doesn't, Pedro Sanchez is out of a job and has to try and get re-elected again. So, putting out 12 points like this to ease the burden or trying to ease the burden of the housing crisis is something politically that is going to try to help him remain in power or come back into power, certainly.
Yeah, and plus, I really believe that is an unlawful measure. Already the treaty of the Fundamental Treaty of Europe, I cannot remember the article, but it is against it. We already have a history here. I don't know if you recall the non-European for inheritance taxes, they will pay different tax than the rest. I don't know if you recall, Pedro, when it was 35%. That is a long time ago, but it did happen. That was declared unlawful. And you cannot tax people differently. Now, whether that kind of measure they're going to do, like all the communities will have a minimum, as Pedro stated. So Andalusia, I think at the moment they even tax 7% to a certain level, and another ones is lower. And I don't know if he's trying to create
a ceiling.
Yeah, a ceiling. That's as you mentioned about the wealth. If you don't have wealth tax, we have solidarity tax. So, but
I think that generally, if people have got that sort of money, that's not going to bother them, is it? Really, they're going to pay it.
Yeah, Yeah, and to be honest with you, I mean, first thing, I really think it is unlawful. Second, we'll see how he ends up with and how fortunate the measure goes through and what specifics. And third, there are always ways around it. Why is that? Because we're all down to the purchase price. So if you increase that tax, probably they will lower the purchase price. So who knows here in a worst case scenario, you know?
But actually, properties dropping in prices, it would actually be quite good for people who live in Spain, because that's the difficulty at the moment. Yeah. They're out of reach.
The statistics I've been reading is between 2 and 3% of purchase and sales in Spain in last year, between 2 and 3. It are bought by non-residents in Spain and non-European Union citizens. So it is obviously it's not a big amount. It's something that is around 15,000 people that has bought a property last year with non-European Union and non-residents in Spain.
So it isn't a huge amount.
It's not a huge amount, but obviously I think that he installed on all arguments the ideology of people, speculation, investments, rich, and people who do not have home, the rents are really high. I mean, he creates this scenario of division, dividing people in the minds of tenants, and he wants to
have nots.
He tries to divide so everyone says who. Obviously, it's a problem. I mean, we have a problem in Spain about property. There are not enough properties.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something. But probably this is not the way to.
There are measures.
This.
There are 12 measures in total. We're just speaking specifically about the 100% that might affect third country people buying houses in Spain. Of course, there are others where, and it's something we've talked about before, where the bank that owns these properties that were basically put there by the government in the financial crisis. It's so long ago now, are still sitting there. The bad bank called Sareb. Yeah. Why weren't these properties used for social housing already before? Because the government owns them. The government bailed out the banks.
That's right.
And these properties now sit with Sareb and they sit empty. Why has this not been done before? Why hasn't it not been used before? That question still remains. They are saying they're going to use them now.
Actually, I'm just looking through a sliding scale they sent over to me from the bank, a study from, I think it was CaixaBank, the one who did. And Alicante is number one on transactions in the whole Spain. They had last year, I think, an average of 28,000 transactions last year, which means 50% were foreigners. And it says 68% was non-resident.
Of that 50%?
Of that 50%.
Yeah, it's difficult to get whole figures for 2024 because obviously it's just over. But the third quarter of 2024, July to September, said 165,000 houses sold in Spain. Only 8% were bought by non-EU foreigners. For 2023, non-EU residents bought 27,000 houses and apartments. That was the Prime Minister's argument. Yeah.
A problem with property and people who are in order to have properties for live. I mean, you need to put a bridge into the builders, developers, and law about the land, and in order to develop, in order to construct, in order to make social housing. I mean, all these you need to put a bridge between this industry and construction and developers, and also in order to satisfy this need, because it's a life need. I mean, there's thousands of people, young people, and obviously in the future want to buy a property.
Well, we know, young people are staying at home for much, much longer because the properties are not available at the prices that they can afford. Yeah. So it's multifaceted, this problem. Hence the 12-point plan, I think, to at least look like the government is trying to do something to resolve them. And some of these things may well come to fruition, and certainly, they have to be seen to be doing something, because last year, as we saw right across Spain, and it's bad business for Spain to be seen to be basically shooting water pistols at tourists in Barcelona, for instance, or occupying beaches in Benidorm or in the Canaries. The government has to be seen to be doing something, and hopefully a number of these measures will help. Whether this 100% tax scenario is even going to get off the ground, we don't think so.
Right?
We
don't think so.
I don't think so, but this is another bluff from
exactly.
And actually, it really is just.
The other one. I mean, there's another one. I think. One of the points is like to increase the value add tax. Well, firstly, those who are owners of properties that are renting it in platforms like Airbnb and touristic licenses, and they could do it into an economic activity where the value add tax is involved. And normally, I would say that 90% of the people who buy that do it in a way that is normal. They just get paid by the owner, and they pay the 19% benefit or net if they are European Union residents, or 24% is the non-European Union residents. And in terms of that, it says, okay, everyone value-add tax. It says, because this is like a business. So if it's everyone value-add tax, and then increase the value-add tax. So, and then that may reduce, obviously, the benefit and the business of whoever has a property or different properties in and renting them out into these kind of platforms. That also is a measure in order to, obviously, to limit people who say, okay, I'm going to invest to rent. Buy to bet.
Yeah, there's 100% personal tax income exemption as one of these measures for people who rent out their homes. There are a lot of properties that sit empty that shouldn't really sit empty.
Sareb properties?
Yeah, I mean, aside from those.
I mean, but it's a good point you brought. I mean, what about the Sareb properties?
Yeah. Well, that is certainly part of it, and no idea why, since 2008, well, give it a couple of years, since 2010 even, why those properties have not become available. They belong to the public anyway.
Correct. It was paid. It was paid by...
I mean, under a different government at the time, I have to say. Still.
It's still there.
Yeah. That's certainly, hopefully, going to make a bit of a difference. But actually, I wonder what... They're going to need quite a bit of work, I would have thought, a lot of those properties. A lot of them actually were unfinished as well, weren't they? Because they were taken by the bad bank once they were half finished. We all seen them around.
But they've been very lazy, these governments, or any governments in the previous years, have been very lazy.
Both the PSOE and the PP have been in power since the financial crisis. So,
so both of them have been lazy trying to get social properties. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, even if you go to Ibiza, people cannot afford... No.
We have policemen and nurses living in their cars.
Yeah.
That's I mean, come on. I think that there was a figure quoted on our website earlier, and I haven't been able to check it, but social housing in Spain, I don't think reaches more than 3%. Okay? In France, it's 15%, for instance.
So
something
there is
like
a lot of work to do.
So there's somewhere in the there's a happy medium in there somewhere.
Exactly.
Got to be.
That's right.
But they need to develop. They need to build.
Doesn't happen overnight.
Rent. It doesn't happen.
That's not overnight.
Or approve some measures in order to those empty properties. Well, empty, I'm not saying about the banks. People do not want to rent because it looks like there is no guarantee for the landlords. It looks like so many people prefer not to rent than rent, even though they would like to have some tenants to get some income because of the security.
Apparently, there's an estimated housing deficit of more than 100,000 homes in Spain. That's the job the government has got to try and do something about. Hopefully, at least some of these 12 measures might help. Meanwhile, part of it, which is something we talked about a couple of times in the past 12 months, and that's the Okupas. The squatters. Very, very difficult under the present laws to get people out. However, there is going to be a measure which might mean we can do that a bit quicker and a bit easier.
I don't know if, Pedro, you're aware of that, but I think nothing is being approved, has it?
Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, the bottom line here with squatters, I believe, it's possible to take them out. The problem is time, Carl. The only problem I see with squatters now is being efficient and being fast.
That's right. I mean, let's divide a little bit about. I mean, if it's an empty property which is maybe is owned by banks or by funds, which is absolutely empty, so those one has a difficult criteria to put the tenants out rapidly. That takes a lot more time, but. And those properties who are owned by people who want to rent a property or people who live in that property and maybe those ones is probably in the magazines, on the TVs, appears all the time that someone has occupied a property and that has a rapid solution. Obviously, is to do it with a criminal denounce.
Yeah, the new regulations which they're hoping to bring in, they will allow.
And obviously, in that terms, normally with the judge or with the lawyer, I mean, it's applied like a preventive measure. Preventive measure, that means that, okay, while the process goes on, while this is managing, put these people out. The problem is that fraud. I mean, the tenants, they appear with a contract. Obviously, it's a fraud. It's cheating. And, but normally I would say that in many cases, people is brought out because it's an order made by the judge. As soon as you make a denuncia, better. What happens with those ones who, okay, I want to rent the property. I want to pay. I pay you the first month. I give you a guarantee the first month. And then second and third, fourth, I never pay. But I have a contract with you. You are a landlord, and this is always a cheat. Or at the same time, it's cheating because your intention was not to pay. It was just enter the property, pay the first month, and stay there. Then appears the criteria of vulnerability, which is vulnerabilidad, what we call when someone is not prepared, has not funds. But that's perfect. But when you have done something illegal on a criminal issue, that's obviously you need to apply in a judge in order to put people out in a preventive measures while the process in the courts appears.
This is the key thing, isn't it? To be considered a full criminal offence.
Yeah.
If it's a criminal offence, then it can be considered breaking and entering. And
exactly.
If the property was when the property is inhabited, but it's home invasion if it's not inhabited.
Exactly, because if you rent to a property someone and it stops paying you, this is no criminal offence. Someone who is renting, for example, 7-8 months, and it stops paying you because they left work, because they don't have any money, then this is a civil issue, absolutely a civil issue. But someone occupies illegally, obviously, your property, and someone cheats you in order to rent the property and pays just 1 or 2 months, preventing that it's going to stay there 1 year, 2 years, but whatever, and have children, that obviously is a cheating point in order to, because in that situation you would have never rent this property to this tenant, and that's a criminal. And if you focus all these things in a criminal offence, as you said, that's the perfect way to do it, to start that.
I mean, they can be summoned in 15 days if it's a criminal offence. Yeah. So, but it was really taking a long time to get this sort of thing sorted before. So hopefully these new measures and the way of approaching it and looking at it will probably do away with a lot of the issues that people have been having with squatters or Okupas, as they're known.
Well, there is 3 ways. The one is the criminal action. The second one is the civil action, which is pretty much like the Southio, right? Eviction order. And the third one that we've used as well is another action, which is empowering, showing that you're the owner of that property, and is one specific action that really throw them out. But the problem is, time again, if the court is overwhelmed, then we're ending to have the same. What is best? For example, criminal action. Something I don't like too much, because they could still appeal that decision on a criminal action. And then how much time are they going to stay on a criminal action? Because they could appeal. On a civil, on the Southio, you unless you pay, you're out. So sometimes it's difficult to, and then you need to value and know what is the workload of that court. Yeah. Because not the same Alicante court, for example, than Torrevieja.
So we know Torrevieja has a lot more business to do.
Is terrible. Denia is okay, and Benidorm is okay as well, but it depends on where your property is.
There are other factors. There are other factors. All right, we're going to let Pedro go. He's got another appointment, but we'll stay with Ignacio, talk about Modelo 720 and family relocation. Things have been coming in whilst we've been talking about the housing situation. Ignacio, Andy says the problem with lowering the purchase price is that if that's lower than the cadastral value, then you get hammered with tax or a fine for underpaying for the property. That's a possibility?
In some areas, there are no a reference value. So you could play a lot with the figures. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I agree with some of them that you already have a minimum. But we'll still see what happens, because this is only Sanchez saying all these. We'll see where we end up.
Gordon's pointing out that the main issue seems to be apartments being bought as holiday lets and put on sites like Airbnb that remain unregistered. And that's really pushed up the prices, certainly in the area of Valencia, where price has gone up by 132% since he and his husband bought in 2016. So you're looking at apartments now in Valencia City at 950,000. Local people do not have that sort of money.
No,
they do not.
That's correct. Is a hot topic, Carl.
And they've got waiting lists for those sorts of properties. People are buying them out just like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, a different problem as well. You could see, depending on the area, Carl, because yesterday I was talking to the notary, and he has he was telling me that he has an inland property, Murcia inland, and in the center of the city, it was 35,000 euros. So if you go around, just try to go different areas. The problem in these areas is demand. unfortunately, these areas, there is a big demand and locals cannot afford to live. But I think all these prices are being hit. I mean, they're higher because of the Europeans or non-European high demand. You go back to Elda. Try to go to Elda one day and try to go to buy a property. You will see the difference. You could get a property for 50,000 euros, 60,000 euros. Obviously, the locals over there could afford it or is not that attractive. So I'd say it's a major, bigger and more complex.
I don't think there's any doubt that there are some properties available in other areas that aren't along the coast, for instance, or aren't in the bigger cities. But that's obviously where,
correct.
Obviously where a lot of people want to buy. Obviously where a lot of money that can be made by renting out as well. And this is where the situation has arisen. And as we keep on hearing all the time, the problem is not individual holidaymakers or individual homeowners or home buyers. It's the overall issue is the fact that the whole model doesn't work, and suddenly some of those 12 measures that the government have brought in may well help, hopefully.
Sure.
Certainly bringing some of those properties back in that have been sat empty for years since the financial crisis got to help once they're put back in order, of course. All right, now... let's talk a little bit about Modelo 720. Time is due. Yes, this is the tax form, right?
Well, let's put it this way. For those who were non-tax resident last year, or for those who need to had some information to alter on their previous 720. So when does it happen? It happens from the 1st of January to the 31st of March. Okay, who's liable to do it? Everybody who's got over 50,000 euros abroad in 3 categories, any of them. 1, bank accounts, generally or individual accounts, or more than 50,000 euros. 2, investments, shares, stocks, over 50,000 euros. And 3, purchase price, property purchase price, more than 50,000 euros at the time. If you fail into any of these 3 categories, you will have to comply 720. What happens if you have an increase, because you already declare it, and you saw that you cancel any rights, you transfer, you donate it, you inherit, okay, then you will need to update the 720. What about if you had an increase on your business on these 3 categories over 20,000 euros? You must update it.
So any changes, any major changes, you have to
any
update
cancellations
720.
or increase of 20,000 euros. We've got an article in our website about it that for whoever is interested to read a little bit further, they could check in pelliceria.com.
Yeah, alicantilawyers.es,
yes,
easy to find.
Easier. And then you need to click on what we do, taxes, and then go 720.
It's right at the top of the tax and fiscal services menu there. Mm-hmm.
And that's basically it. And after the 31st of March, then La Renta comes based on this information. Okay, what about if you're a non-tax resident? You don't need to do that. Okay, so it's only for those who were tax resident in 2024. Mm-hmm. Okay, more than 183 days in Spain.
Okay. Next week, the seminar is back and the webinar about family relocation and everything that's involved in that. Yeah. Quite a big subject, I would have thought. Subject,
yeah. I mean, I think it's a good beginning for 2025. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are thinking about we're going to make a move when you go to Spain. I always recommend to plan ahead. Mm-hmm. It's better, it's safer,
know what you're getting into.
You know what is the final picture, Then what are you going to face? Well, if you have family, you're going to just have to relocate your children into, probably my recommendation to start with an international school is always easier for the children, but you could always go into public and register, so that's not a problem. Number 2, you will need to apply for your visas if you're a non-European or your residency if you're European. Then if you're going to fall and come over here more than 6 months, so let's say you start coming from the 1st of July and you stay, you will fall into the category of being resident. You need to do your tax resident for next year. Obviously, you will do the 720, you will do the renta, you will do, if applicable, the wealth tax, etc., etc. So we're talking about immigration, taxation, obviously property. Are you renting? You're starting to rent and probably buying a property eventually. Are you setting up a business? Are you applying for the normal visa? I mean, a lot of questions.
And what's right for you? And
Correct.
It's an individual thing, isn't it? Because it can be very different from one family
specific.
to another, let alone one individual to another.
You cannot recommend everything to one because everybody's different and everybody's got their numbers, their figures, their priorities, their families. So some people will use the Beckham law. So it's very important to do it within the 6 months of being resident in Spain to just try to apply for these big allowance and pay only 24% up to 600,000 euros income. So there are a lot of things called to think.
It's quite a big list, isn't it? I mean, that's why there are immigration lawyers that specifically deal with this. And again, of course, on the website, alicantilawyers.es, there's a long menu of issues. And you'll be live on the website next week talking about that. We'll remind everybody around about the same time for when that comes up. Anyway, thanks. Plenty of useful information for us today. And good to hear about the way that the lawyers in Spain are thinking about what the government's been saying over the last week anyway. Might not actually be legal. Good one. Thanks very much indeed, Ignacio. See you in a couple of weeks.
See you soon.